So, Kate, really appreciate getting a little bit of time to chat with you. I'm sure everyone at Zeo knows Kate. Kate's one of our assistant pastors, been part of the Zeo family for a long, long time, but also is a doctor and psychologist by experience, academia, whatever. What's the right phrase there?
I just go with background.
Background. That was the word. I was looking for the word background. Background is the word, and that's all good. So many of you will know that. And so we're super blessed to have Kate with us. And actually, the church in the UK has been blessed by Kate because she's speaking a lot of, sharing a lot of stuff with other churches around the country at the moment about how we respond in the current challenges of COVID, particularly around the areas of mental health and emotional well-being. And we just thought it would be remiss of us not to do a similar thing and just have you share with us as a Zeo Church what you sense is going on when it comes to mental health, what's happening, and how can we respond. So let's just jump straight in. Just kind of give us some broad brush stuff. Mental health, COVID, what's going on?
Yeah, and I guess it's interesting, first of all, just to set the context that when we're talking mental health, everybody immediately starts to think about illness and specific maybe mental illnesses or struggles that people you know have had or that maybe you've had personally. But we're at Mind and Soul Foundation, which is the organisation that I work for when I'm not in Zeo, is what we're passionate about is the whole picture of what that means. So mental health when it's about illness, but also when it's about wellness, like what does it mean? So one of my little, apparently very annoying to my family, little catchphrases is, what does it mean to not just survive, but thrive, whatever life is throwing at you? And usually as a psychologist or some of my colleagues who are professionals in other fields, what we're doing is working with individuals who've hit storms in life, challenges in life, and helping them figure that stuff out with some useful tips and tricks. Also figuring out how do you get out of this storm, maybe make some good changes in your life or your rhythm or routines. What's interesting about this season is that it's affected all of us. One of my colleagues talks about everything, everyone, everywhere. It's this universal, massive change that we've been through. And there have been some different phases. You know, at first there was just the shock of lockdown. I think we all saw it coming to a degree, but the actual practical reality of what that would mean for us hit all of us in different ways. Some people having to shield and very much withdraw into quite a small space. Others just things like suddenly your kids can't go to school or you can't go to work. Practical things that are normally you just don't think about, like going to the supermarket, and suddenly that becomes a major undertaking. And then we sort of hit this acute crisis way of living, where we're doing one day at a time. There's lots that's new, lots that's challenging, but it's also in a weird way, it's quite interesting. There's lots to focus, lots to keep you busy. You feel quite productive because you're overcoming and dealing with these challenges. Sure. And then, of course, we go into lockdown, and you've got, like, what are we now, like week 10 or something? Weeks of the challenge of dealing with inactivity, with boredom, with the loss of productivity, with not being with the people that you love, all kinds of issues and challenges around how we can do that. And starting to see some quite big differences open up, depending on people's experience. So for some people, this has been an amazing time of blessings, of hanging out with the people they're closest to, of having more time and space in life. But for other people, it's been a really dark time, a difficult time. Or if you're a frontline worker, it's been a time of real pressure, of challenge. Or maybe you're trying to do your full-time job and you've got your kids to homeschool as well. So for some people, it's been a time of being pressed to the limit. So we're all in different situations, but the challenge for emotional mental well-being is there for everyone. How do you do this? And of course, now we're in this season I'm calling release and the new normal. And it's like, how do we do something that looks a bit like normal life? Because we've got to get back to something. We can't just be on pause forever, but we've still got COVID around. We've got challenges around distancing and making good decisions about risk and dealing with the anxiety that's linked with that. And again, this imbalance, because some people are still having to shield. They still can't go out. They can't get back to normal at all. Whereas other people, life is almost starting to feel quite normal. I know, like Leah the other day was like, groundworks are serving coffee again. It's like, these are the key things in life. Yeah. So for some of us, it's feeling like maybe we can get back to something that's close to normal, but for others, not at all. And again, we've got to think about, what does that mean then? What does it mean to do this season, to do it well, to be kind to ourselves, to be kind to other people, and to do it all together?
Yeah, and I mean, it's been interesting that there's been a lot of talk, particularly over recent weeks, about people, even as we come out of this, the mental health issues, the physical health issues might come through, but the mental health issues could still become huge.
Yeah.
And, and, and so tell us, like, what are some top things that people can do that are going to help them and that they can pass on to other people so that we don't see a pandemic of mental health issues? And we know there are big challenges even now, even before COVID. But like, you know, what, like when you go around and you speak to people and you say, like, if you just do these things, they're going to make a massive difference.
Yeah, and I think that is really key, because what we have here is an extended season where there is going to be challenge, unpredictability, uncertainty, and quite a lot of variation in what that looks like. And so we can't do that. When it first hit and we were all like, head down, let's just manage this, that only takes you so far. You will get exhausted, and you can't live life like that over a long period of time. So that's why people are talking about the new normal, because they're encouraging us to think in that different way. So 3 sort of key things that I think we need to think about in the season, each of us individually, but also for those that we're caring for our kids, teens, people we have responsibility for, and of course as leaders. So number 1 is about how we manage stress, and particularly recognizing peaks in stress and dealing with that really well. So one of the ways that your brain keeps stress levels relatively low is by keeping a degree of routine and predictability in your life. And it's a bit like trying to climb a cliff face. It's like if all of your handholds are there, you can do it pretty much without thinking. But what's happened in this season is that all of those handholds have gone, or they've changed, or they've moved. The cliff face looks different. Everything's new, or maybe even worse, it sort of feels normal, but then there are little jarring aspects that definitely are not normal, that trigger a little emotional reaction, a bit of anxiety as your brain's trying to grapple with what that means. And so what this does to us in terms of stress is it raises everyone's stress level. And stress isn't the same thing as distress. So it's not that you're necessarily upset by it. It's just that your mind's having to work harder just to do the everyday things that you do in life. And we all have a kind of crisis point on our stress level where if it raises any higher, we're literally going to start feeling like we might go under. It's exceeding our capacity to cope with it, just in terms of how much you can juggle in your mind or your physical or emotional energy levels. Yeah. And I think probably quite a lot of us would reflect that there have been times in this season where we felt on the edge of overwhelm. We felt exhausted. And when you're there, because this physiological system is the same one that emotions like frustration and anxiety trigger, you feel very prickly. You're quite reactive. You're quite close to the edge. You struggle more with those emotions than you normally would do. So we see more conflict, more arguments. People are much more spiky in the way they respond to things. But also, it's harder to deal with anxiety. It's like the little waves of life that normally when the level was lower, you can cope with them. In this time, those waves become really significant. And, you know, something little like people stacking the dishwasher the wrong way. I mean, why? Why would you do that? You just think this is the thing that's going to push me over the edge. I cannot cope with this. And that's why. It's because you're on the edge of overwhelm. And every time things change, your stress level rises, even if you're not finding it distressing, just because of the amount that you're juggling. So we have to be really proactive and careful about the things that drop that level back down or help to keep it low. So that's why when lockdown started, you heard a lot of people talking about routine and predictability. So trying to do things, even though you're at home, maybe furloughed or your kids aren't in school, try and get up at the same time that you normally would. Try and have your meals at regular points in the day. Develop a rhythm and a routine, because that again is about your brain just being able to relax back into something that feels predictable. Rest is so important, and relaxation, that's like pulling the plug out and letting the water level drop in your stressometer. So, but how do you do that? How do you get away and get headspace when everything is in your house, if you're shielding, or when the things that are worrying you, the demands on your brain, are hard to switch off because they're ticking round and round in your head the whole time? So we've got to be creative about how we do that and prioritize it and recognize, you know, when we're busy, when we're pressed, it's so easy to think, I'll do everything else I've got to do first, and then if I have time, I'll relax, or I'll rest, or I'll go out for a walk, or whatever it is. But actually in this season, we've got to prioritize that stuff, because if you don't manage your stress levels, everything else that you do will be affected. You won't do it as well. And the temptation might be to live on the edge of overwhelm and burnout and just think, well, as long as I don't go over the edge, it's fine. But just be so careful, because this is not a short-term season where in a week it's all going to go away. So we've got to change our approach to this and start to be much more proactive about how we manage that stuff and help our kids and our families, in particular things like sleep, prioritizing good sleep routine, because once you get tired, it just makes everything harder. So that's my number one.
Great. Love it.
Number two, there's three, by the way, if you're keeping count.
I love three things. Do they begin with the same letter?
I know. No, I'm really sorry they don't. I know. I'm just getting sloppy. Number two is about expressing and processing difficult emotions, therefore. And it's really good. Another thing we saw a lot of in the early weeks of lockdown was this drive to be positive, think positive. That's good. But emotional well-being isn't about denying the existence of difficult emotions. And in this season, again, for a short-term acute thing, you can manage just with pure, just blind positivity. But in this season, we need to recognize there are some difficult things going on. We need to make appropriate spaces and find good ways to express and process them. And in particular, if we're not experiencing them ourselves, we need to be kind and compassionate to other people who might be. Maybe your world is okay, but other people who you're chatting to on social media or you're on Zoom calls with or whatever, things might be a lot more difficult for them. So we're talking about loss, where that's loss of routine, loss of freedom, loss of friendships, loss of the social support and security that we normally take for granted, loss of your job, of productivity, so much loss. And again, more for some people than for others. It might be the loss of bereavement. You know, some of us tragically have been affected directly with family or friends who've lost their fight to this virus. So we have to recognize some people are processing grief of bereavement as well. Anxiety is a really interesting emotion and one that's pretty key, pretty challenging in this stage, particularly because in this season, we are having to go out again. You know, in lockdown, there was a really strong message that said, stay home, stay safe. And it worked well. It changed people's behavior. But what that meant over 8 to 10 weeks is that your brain starts to associate being safe with being at home. So the minute you start to go out again, you will experience anxiety because your brain is like, hello, you're breaking the golden rule. So we're all going to have to manage some. And how much depends on how anxious you generally are as personality, how much exposure and experience you've had of some of the negative aspects of the virus, all sorts of things, how you perceive your own risk and things like that. So we've all got to be careful and manage that risk well, that anxiety well. And remember that just experiencing anxiety doesn't mean that the worst thing is definitely going to happen. It's your brain's way of warning you and grabbing your attention. So we've got to think about how we deal with anxiety. And then, of course, frustration. I mean, frustration has just been so much a part of this season. The things you want to do but can't, the limitations to life that are going to continue. And we've already seen that frustration just bubbling over, particularly on social media, with disagreements and debates about what is and isn't allowed and who's doing the right thing and who's doing the wrong thing. We've all got to manage that well, because if we don't, it either bubbles over against someone else, which generally isn't helpful. You know, the person who stacked the dishwasher the wrong way probably isn't trying to ruin your day. It might just be that you're really crabby. I'm not talking about myself here, obviously. But, or even worse, you turn it in on yourself. And when we get frustrated and we've got no outlet for it, sometimes what happens is we start to beat ourselves up. And you don't need to feel guilt and negativity about yourself on top of those other emotions in this time. So we've got to think about that stuff. And then number 3, finally, the good news is about the pursuit of good stuff. Okay. And, you know, emotional well-being isn't just avoiding the negative things or dealing with the difficult stuff. It is about pursuing and building into life good stuff. Joy, fun, laughter, friendship. But so many of those things have become much more challenging in this season. And some of our basic needs as human beings have been challenged and threatened by this virus and this crisis. You know, our need for connection, for physical contact with other human beings. And thank goodness for some of us, we're starting to be able to meet up with people again, you know, really slow, one person at a time, 2 meters apart, outside, whatever it is. But there are still some people who can't even do that, who are still having to rely on online remote comms. And that stuff is really hard. Our need for fresh air, for freedom to get out into nature again. Thank goodness some of us now are much freer and more able to do that. But let's not forget the people who are still stuck in their own homes, who are having to think creatively about how they can do that stuff. So we've got to think about new ways to bring that good stuff into life. And again, try and prioritize it, try and find space for it. And do that in a season when, if we're honest, motivation can be really hard. And if you do start to struggle with your mood and emotional health, that can become the hardest thing. Because I talk about mood, if it drops below a certain point, it's what I call the swamp zone. It's really hard to get yourself out of there. And sometimes when you're stuck in the swamp zone, you need somebody else to pull you out, chuck you a rope, help you. So we've got to support one another. Look out for people who are struggling. Look out for people who vanished. Think about, who haven't I heard from for 8 weeks? Are they doing all right? Whose situation is more difficult than mine? Maybe I'll drop them a message or put a note through their door or send them some flowers to cheer them up, you know. So it's about being kind to ourselves this season, but it's also about being kind to other people and doing this genuinely together as family.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine what you would say is that like all three of those things are really important. It's not like people think, okay, I'll just do that one, but actually all three of those things working together to kind of bring a greater sense of emotional health. So just soundbite us those three things again.
So it's managing your stress levels, recognizing peaks. So often we miss it. What we see is number two, the difficult emotions that we're trying to deal with. But often the solution to number two is to deal with number one. What are you building into your routine that is about managing stress, keeping that baseline low, staying sane? This is an extended period. You've got to do that. So manage your stress levels. Think about your routine. What about rest? What about relaxation? See, there's lots of things with the same letter.
No, I love that. I love that letter R stuff.
That's dropping your stress level right now, I can tell. And then it is about dealing with the difficult emotions. I know they feel overwhelming. They're not pleasant. We don't want to connect with them. But we will need to find some good and safe spaces to express and process them, and do it in appropriate ways, particularly if you've got responsibility for caring for other people. I know in my household, some of the most teenage behavior in the last 6 to 8 weeks has come from me, not from my teenager, because I've been stressed out, I have lost it, I have shouted, I've not handled it well, because I'm under pressure. But that's not good enough. I need to find better spaces to express, process, and manage those emotions, because I've got responsibilities for other people, as well as for keeping myself well. So that's number two. And then number three is about the good stuff. Find a way of doing it. It's so easy just to think, oh, I can't do what I want to do, so I can't do anything. And that's when the motivation thing hits and low mood can become a problem. And we have got to be creative. We've got to try and find ways of doing connection, of doing fun, of getting back into something that resembles normal in a phase that definitely isn't normal yet.
I guess in all of those things, even if people are feeling a bit overwhelmed of like, well, where to start, small incremental steps can make a big difference, can't they?
Yeah, definitely. I have a psychologist friend who says, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is bite by bite. And in so many of these things, and particularly when we are feeling overwhelmed, when your stress level gets above that sort of crisis point, your thinking brain, your ability to rationalize and solve problems gets turned right down. It's like your brain goes onto a sort of emergency mode. And so it's really hard to think things through, to come up with possible solutions, to problem solve, think of ideas. And so it feels like you're stuck. It feels like there are no solutions. And so what we've got to do is break down the big problems into manageable things. You know, what's the smallest thing that you feel like you could do if you're feeling overwhelmed by something, by a problem that you've got to solve? Or even if it's not that, even if it's building in the good stuff and you think, well, what I'd normally do is go for a walk around Hitchwood, but I just can't face it and I can't get there, and well, make it smaller. What's the smallest way that you could get outside? Could you sit on your back step and have a cup of tea in the sun? Little things like that will make a difference to your well-being. So breaking them down, making it simple is really important.
Now, all of the advice you've given, which has been brilliant, that's gonna work for everyone. All of us can respond, however old or young we are. But I know for you, you're a person of faith. You are a person who believes in Jesus and would call yourself a follower of Jesus. Maybe not everyone who's watching this is, but what's the faith perspective on this? How does your faith in God kind of impact this whole area as well, in a way that, again, maybe people think, okay, that's interesting, maybe that's something to think about too?
Yeah, and I guess our faith gives us three things. Perhaps it gives us a meaning, a wider perspective on what's going on some of the dynamics in our world, trying to understand how we find ourselves in this sort of situation. I think that our faith can also change the way that we respond to things. It gives us new priorities and a new way of seeing our culture, so the opportunity to try and do things together, just how important that is. It gives us some new messages about what we should be doing in this season, and a new motivation for the way that we approach it. Hopefully it releases a potential of us all collectively together to do this together really well. And then the third thing I think that faith does give us is a different perspective on ourselves. You know, our culture says what we should do is somehow make ourselves more superhuman, more brilliant, more perfect. You know, and we see celebrated in the media and social media the versions of that, either the people who've done something utterly outstanding, they've achieved something amazing, or just the airbrushed wonderful moments in other people's weeks. And we all know real life isn't like that. Mostly we feel quite a mess, quite chaotic, I always say I'm a bit of a shambles, really, and that's very much how most of my everyday feels, but that's not what goes on Instagram. And what our faith does is gives us a message where it says that's okay, and actually there's a beauty in our humanity, there's a beauty in the complexity of who we are as human beings, and also that's how God works. You know, it's not through the amazing people, the superhuman people, it is through a bunch of normal people together muddling on through the challenges of life that God flows through that, and something amazing can happen there. We can see all the things that we long for so much in this season: light and life and hope and joy, and the good things of God break out just in normal human beings. And I think that is really inspiring when we face a bigger, darker challenge like the one that we're in now.
Yeah, because I guess so many people have a view, don't they, perhaps that if there is a God, then we need to get ourselves sorted in
Mm.
order to connect with Him. But I guess what we believe is actually no, we can come to Him in brokenness and vulnerability, and in all these things that you've talked about. And there is help from heaven. You know, in a sense, there is something in the divine that we can reach out to and have help beyond ourselves. Maybe that help that our soul is looking for.
Yeah, and the security of that, you know, when everything else in your world is shaken, what remains? And just the solidity of God, the fact that we can depend on God to be there, and that is expressed. You know, people often separate it. They say, oh well, I haven't heard from God at all, but one of my neighbors did something amazing for me, or my best friend did something amazing. And recognizing that when we have wonderful experiences of human beings, that is so often something of the divine being reflected through other people.
Yeah.
That is how God chooses to act on this earth. And so we can be part of that. Even if you're at home, if you're shielding, if you can't leave the house, there is a way to enter into God's bigger story, whether it's praying, intercessing, caring, or reaching out, making phone calls or posting letters, getting someone else to take down the post for you. Whatever it is, you can be part of a bigger story and of bringing light and life to people. And that's brilliant. It's amazing.
It reminds me of your quote about thriving, the one that annoys your family maybe sometimes. But I guess we do believe that God wants people to thrive
Yeah.
in the whole of life. That faith is not about just where you go after you die, but that you can thrive right here, right now. And actually our mental health, our emotional well-being, like it matters to God. God cares about those things. And we know it matters for all age groups, but also when we look at the life of Jesus, like children and young people seem to have a special place in his heart. And I know that, again, you've had many years experience working with young people. I have too. And I think we probably both agree that I would say in all the generations of young people that I've worked with, never seen a generation who are contending so much with mental health challenges as now. And I know that even last year you started to get involved in some new ideas, thinking resources, both with your mind and soul hat on, with your assistant pastor at Zeo, and a connection with Youthscape, which is another youth charity that I've been involved in as well, in this headstrong thing to try to see young people thrive. Tell us a little bit about what was going on there a year or so
Yeah.
ago.
And I guess this comes about my passion about that space around not just thinking about what do we do when you get ill, how do we try and help you get well and muddle through that, but what if not only could we prevent you from getting ill in the first place, because that's better, but what if more than that, what if we could teach you about how you release your potential, like you say, how do you experience more of life? That the Message translation talks about when Jesus said that there was more and better life than you ever dreamed of. So how do we tap into that? How do we release that in ourselves? And we're in this season, and our kids and teens, so I've got an 8-year-old, people who don't know me, I've got an 8-year-old and a nearly 15-year-old. I always say she's 15, she's actually not yet, but she's nearly 15. And they're growing up in this season where their culture bombards them with some difficult messages about what it means to be successful or valuable or have a life that's worth something. So in this season and in this culture, it's not good enough to only be academically successful or academically brilliant. You know, you could get the grades you want, you could get the job you want, you could do all of that and still be miserable. And that's not success, that's not more and better life. So what Headstrong started out as, working with Youthscape, whose brilliant name it was, we're starting to think, what does it mean to teach young people? How do you thrive in spite of the challenges of life? And that's always been something I've been super passionate about. So yeah, got involved with doing that in some of our local schools. I'm a governor at the girls' school. So me and one of the staff there, Laura Cole, were able to put into place and start to play with this idea. How do you take a generation of young people represented by one school worth of young people and start to talk to them about this challenge and start to teach them about the skills that you need in order not just to be academically strong, but to be headstrong as well, to meet the challenges of life. And then, of course, we were hit by a challenge none of us saw coming, which was lockdown. So we started that as a year-long campaign in the school, and we're continuing to run it now online, but also been continuing to do some of that with Youthscape and think about the wider scope for that project.
Which I guess is, you know, this next incredible opportunity that's just come your way and our way, because as a church, like anyone who's been part of Zeo knows that we are absolutely a church for everybody, for every generation. We want to see everyone experience that fullness of life from Jesus, but we feel a particular passion for under 30s, children, young people and young adults, and because we know that there is so much pressure in that journey from childhood to adulthood. And fantastic to see what you were doing. And I know Alex, our youth and young adults pastor, was involved in some of that stuff in the school.
Yes,
awesome. You know, I mean, it's a global issue, but it's a UK issue that, like, you know, so much mental health challenges. And we all know this is a time of change. This is a time of transition. We're all praying, God, what are you up to? How do we join in? And I think it was about a month ago, maybe, that Youthscape had kind of contacted you with your Mind and Soul hat on, and your Mind and Soul colleagues, about an opportunity to maybe take what was started to be piloted locally and really develop something significant nationally. Tell us more about Headstrong going national. What's that about?
Yeah, and it came really out of these wider concerns about what we've already been talking about, the challenges of this season, but particularly thinking about teenagers and young people, because this will hit them in a way that is more impactful and more challenging. You know, we know that the teenage years are years where there's a lot of adjustment, new skills being learned, literal changes to the brain, and doing that in the COVID season is difficult. Not being able to access school, not being able to meet up with friends and do all the things you would normally do. And there's so much discussion in some of the professional spaces that I'm involved with, talking about what is going to be the impact on this generation of young people and how can we support them to get through this really well. And so out of that, suddenly, out of the blue, came the opportunity and the funding to say, well, what if we took Headstrong, this fledgling sort of resource and idea that we've been playing with and praying into, and rolled it out really rapidly so that we could get a resource out for that generation of young people that supported them, that gave them some tips, some ideas, a space where they could have good conversations about this stuff and help them through. So it was a sort of a unique opportunity in a unique season, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we obviously, when we heard that as a leadership team, and you're part of the leadership team and even as trustees, kind of recognize how important that is at this time. And actually, genuinely, Youthscape think this, we think this, Mind and Soul think this, that actually there's no one better to lead that initiative than you. You know, I've had the privilege of working with you even back in, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago when you came on tour with me and we were going around speaking about mental health. And it wasn't as bad then as it is now in the Urban Saints days. And so you know, I've got lots of experience of just, you know, watching you and learning from you in this area, and just what profound impact that you have. And so church, like, so we have prayed, and we just think this is so important, and this opportunity, this is such a moment that we felt as a leadership team and trustees that we need to release some of Kate's time to lead on this on behalf of Youthscape and Mind and Soul. And from the 1st of June, for what we think will be about 6 months, Kate's going to essentially do that. She's going to lead this project, and we're going to release some of her hours. She'll still work for Zeo, and she'll work for Zeo about 15 hours a week in that season. And then, but so tell us first of all a bit about what you see these 6 months with leading on Headstrong for you is about, and then I'll ask you some questions about Zeo.
Yes, I mean, it's hugely exciting, but also quite daunting. But it is the opportunity to create this online resource that is full of video content, written content, all sorts of stuff that's uniquely and specifically designed for teens from a church background. So much like we do at Zeo, accessible for anyone, whatever faith background, no faith background, whatever, but also talking about the ancient wisdom from the Bible. What does an understanding of the way that we're created as God's people, how does that influence the way that we respond to this stuff, the things that we understand about the way that the mind works and our emotions work and stuff like that. So we're going to be setting that up, and we've got an initial 3-month challenge to get phase 1 up and online, so that by the end of the summer there is something that teens can go and get stuck into and be viewing and get involved with. We're hoping to get some teens and young people to be vlogging and sharing stuff and inputting questions that we can answer, drawing in some amazing, talented, passionate people from the church world and maybe even further afield who have a voice to young people at this time. And then in the second 3 months, we'll then be thinking, well, start to just think bigger. What more could we do with this space? So we're aware that there's the need to give young people some skills. So we might roll out some online course element stuff there around things like anxiety, managing stress, some of that sort of stuff where kids and teens, or the sort of teens and older teens can log in from home and view some of that content and improve their skills and learn more about how to manage that stuff. We've got all kinds of other ideas too. So it's going to be really exciting to do that, I think.
Absolutely. But as you said, a massive responsibility.
Yeah.
And, you know, a big thing to try to get off the ground, you know, in a short time frame to address the immediate need. I know that part of the funding, you know, this includes some promotion. And I know that, you know, we would love to say, I think there's nearly 50,000 churches in the UK, and there's going to be some intentional efforts to get to as many of those churches as possible to bring this good news resource to their local communities. And so we're proud of you. We feel honored to release you, and we're going to cheer and pray for you in that, and we'll come to that in a moment. But you're not leaving Zeo. You're still very much 15 hours a week, you know, involved, and of course you are a key member of the leadership team as well. So for people who might be asking, okay, so what's Kate going to do? Like, you know, like, is the pastoral ministry going to fall in a heap? You know, is this terrible? So just tell us a little bit about what this will just mean for you then, in terms of what your main focus will be in Zeo over these 6 months.
Yeah, and first of all, Matt, let me say a huge thank you to you and the leadership team. It is amazing to be part of a team who are flexible enough and committed enough to what God is doing to be willing to see something like this and make these kind of changes. It's amazing. And so I feel really privileged to be part of Zeo, but also to be able to step into stuff that God is doing like this. For the time I'm keeping at Zeo, I mean, we've been blessed recently, of course, with the amazing Stephanie coming on board. For a long time, I've been overseeing kids work and doing some work in that. So actually, there's a chunk of my time that you and I were thinking and praying about, what is God going to be asking me to step into? I'm not sure either of us would ever have thought it was something outside of Zeo, but so there is some space in my time. So what remains with Zeo, I will continue to head up the pastoral stuff. Obviously, in this season, there's huge challenges to us within our church family, within our own community, not just young people, people of all ages, all backgrounds, all situations. And I'll be continuing to focus on that stuff to be stuck in. So keep getting in touch with me as you normally would. Expect to see me in the spaces you normally would, mostly screens at the moment, unfortunately, but hopefully face to face at some point. And yeah, that stuff won't change. And I'm blessed to have an amazing team of people as well who help and support on pastoral stuff. So that's going to be my primary focus, bit of preaching and teaching and stuff around the edges as well, as usual.
Absolutely. So we're kind of hoping, aren't we, ultimately, that the church wider won't really notice a difference.
No, they probably wonder what I do most of the time anyway.
So, well, for us all, I think that's probably the case. But like, one of the great things you've done over the last year or so, with people like Belinda and others, just built a really strong pastoral team. And if you are watching this, you're part of our pastoral team. We're so grateful to you. And if you're part of a group, remember, like, we want our groups to be places where people are cared for. And ultimately,
we're excited about this season too, because this is a season we are expanding our vision of what pastoral care is, to think beyond illness and think about wellness and thriving. And Belinda's already writing this amazing blog, which is on the Zeo Church website, and you will see other stuff. So we're not going to stop developing what we're doing in Zeo either, to make sure we can all thrive through this season too.
And ultimately, we want Zeo to be a culture where just it's normal that we care for each other, that we don't look to one person to be the source of all that care, that actually that there is a culture of care and pastoring and stuff going on. And it's great to see the progress we're making on that. And again, those of you who are watching this, like, come on, this is all of our job. It's not Kate's job, it's all of our job. But we're grateful for the leadership that Kate brings to it. So Kate, tell us, how can we pray as we start to draw this to a close? We recognize, like, you're a mum, you're an exceptional leader, you are in demand speaking in various places. You're leading. You're not just part of the team. You are leading on this project. These are some big responsibilities, and we want the church to be praying for you regularly, standing with you. How do we pray for you?
Yeah, I mean, and I think exactly what you've just said is the main prayer. It's for the balance and the juggle of all those things. So there is a big part of me, if I'm honest, that heartily wishes I was doing this at a time when I was not also homeschooling my child and dealing with all the other things that I'm having to deal with, and having to do it online and remotely. It makes a difficult job even more complex. And if God wasn't in it, I think I might be too daunted by it. I might have said just, no, I don't think I can do it. But it feels like God's really in it. But boy, am I going to need God to be in it to do this as well as I want to do it, and as well as the young people of the country deserve it to be done. So just prayer for that, prayer for the juggle, prayer for good decision making, prayer for my poor family, because they get the rough end of me if I've spent the entire day on Zoom and then I come out and poor Nathan's got some maths question for me, or they're expecting dinner or something, So definitely prayer for that. And just that I'll hold that responsibility well and recognize where my responsibility ends and God's begins, because ultimately it's going to be God's inspiration and God's dream, God's vision, and God's cleverness, not mine, which is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth saying, isn't it, that like we haven't got time to go into all of the fingerprints of God, but actually what has helped us, really enabled us all to get to this decision is 3 or 4 really significant things that happened that just made us think, this is only God. Like, this shouldn't have happened, but like almost like God saying, this needs to happen, and God making a way where there didn't seem to be a way. And so as you're listening to this, Zeo, like, we've really prayed this through. We've talked a lot as a team about it, because we recognize the importance and our primary care, most of all for Kate, and that she's well and healthy and not overburdened with too much work. And I know that will be your prayer too. And of course, we stand with you in praying that this will bear the fruit that we long for, that actually, that when these resources are released, that they will bring significant difference to hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of young people. And actually it needs to have that level of change, doesn't it? Like, we're not doing this for 100 or 100 days. Like, we're talking about, we are praying for, believing for, that the Holy Spirit can work through you and this team to develop something that could bring a cultural shift in terms of mental well-being in this country, but of course it could go further because this
Yeah,
stuff's...
I mean, that's always been our prayer. And, God gave me a vision a long time ago, years back, for a time when people would look to young people who had a faith, and would say, like, what is it about this bunch of young people that they are bucking the trends of their generation because they're well, they're happy, they're thriving. And it feels exciting to think, what is it that God's doing with this project that is about changing the culture of a generation, and speaking a new voice over them to say there is more, there is better, there is a way to do this, and to experience the good stuff of God.
Yeah, and I
teach them a bit about that too. I mean,
no, of course, and I think for us, of course, as Zeo, this stuff is going to help us. As much as we're releasing you, and we want to see this happen for the nation. These are what I'm excited about as well, is that these resources and tools and stuff we will be able to use with our young people and our children, and that's just got to be good news. And so again,
and we are going to draw in expertise. I think it's important to say, because as my kid said to me the other day, this isn't going to just be a website full of videos of you banging on, is it, Mum? No, we're going to be drawing in some amazing people to share expertise, their own stories of what it's meant to battle through some challenging stuff in life, how they found God's strength has been a support in that. It's going to be amazing. I expect to find some adult interlopers wanting to read some of it too, because I think it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it myself. Absolutely.
Well, we're just big kids at heart, as you know.
That's absolutely true. Well, listen, Kate, thanks so much for the wisdom in the early part of this. I think, that stuff's great. It's just, again, another good indicator of how well positioned and all that God has put in you in order to kind of pour out and help other people. Like, we're proud of you. We believe in you. I know I speak for everyone, not just in the team of the trustees, but the church. Like, we will be praying. And maybe over this next six months, from time to time, let's do a little update so people know what's going on. And that'll be great. But God bless you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matt.